I never thought I'd find myself clinging to the tiny hands of a child, desperate to keep her from falling to her death. But that's exactly what happened with my 6-year-old niece. A little girl with a disability who had been pushed so far by neglect and cruelty that she thought the world would be better off without her. What her own mother didn't know was that I wasn't about to let her lose her life, and I wasn't about to let her suffer in silence any longer. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. The memory is seared into me like a scar. One of those moments you know you'll never forget because it changed everything in an instant. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind where the sun spills lazily across the balcony, warming the tiles under your feet. But what I walked into that day was anything but ordinary. I can still hear the soft shuffle of her little shoes against the concrete when I opened the sliding glass door. At first, I thought nothing of it. My niece often liked to stand outside and hum to herself, pretending she was in some magical place far away. But then I saw it. Her tiny body perched on the edge of the balcony railing, her arms stretched slightly out as if she were trying to balance, her small fingers gripping the metal. For a split second, my brain couldn't process it. I froze, staring at her back, the wind tugging at her dress. 6 years old. 6. And yet there she was, ready to let go. Instinct jolted me forward before reason even caught up. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears as I lunged and grabbed her, wrapping both arms around her fragile frame. She was lighter than she should have been, far too thin for a child her age, and I pulled her down to the ground, holding her so tightly she squeaked. I kept whispering, "You're safe. I've got you. You're safe." But then she said something that shattered me. Between hiccups and tears, she whispered, "Mom said nobody wants me here. So I thought I should go." I don't think I've ever felt such a piercing combination of terror and heartbreak. In that moment, my knees went weak. It wasn't just that I had almost lost her. It was realizing she wanted to disappear. That a 6-year-old, who should have been giggling over dolls or drawing with crayons, had been convinced she was unwanted enough to take such a step. The world seemed to blur around me. All I could focus on was her face, wet with tears, eyes so desperate for love it physically hurt to look at her. And as she clung to me, trembling, something inside me hardened. I knew then and there that this wasn't just a close call. This was a turning point. You see, my niece wasn't just any child. She had been born with a disability that required extra patience and care. And instead of rising to the challenge, her mother, my own sister-in-law, treated her as nothing more than a burden. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed things that felt off, but it was the first time the danger was undeniable, right there in front of me, a breath away from tragedy. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep brushing off the warning signs. I couldn't keep hoping things would get better on their own. If I wanted my niece to survive, not just physically, but emotionally, I had to act. And believe me, I would. After that moment on the balcony, I couldn't stop replaying the pieces of our lives that had led up to it. Sometimes, when you look back, you realize the signs were all there, whispering warnings you didn't want to believe. But when you finally connect the dots, the picture is undeniable. Let me tell you about the people at the center of this story. First, there's me. I'm the kind of person who has always been described as responsible. The one family members could call if they needed help. The one who stayed behind to clean up when everyone else had left the party. I wasn't perfect, but I prided myself on being steady, grounded. The type who didn't shy away from responsibility. That's part of why my niece gravitated to me. She knew, even at 6 years old, that I wouldn't dismiss her. I would listen, I would notice, and then there was my niece. She was such a fragile soul, but fragile in the way that a butterfly is fragile, delicate, yet carrying a beauty that could brighten a room. She had been born with a disability that slowed her development compared to other kids her age. Some things were harder for her, climbing stairs, writing neatly, or following complicated instructions. But none of that stopped her from trying. She had a spark of determination that made me proud every time I saw her. I remember how she would come to my apartment, carrying her worn-out teddy bear, and immediately ask if she could help cook. Her version of helping was stirring an empty pot with a wooden spoon, humming as though she were on a cooking show. Moments like that, small, ordinary moments, showed me just how eager she was to be included, to be loved. But then, there was her mother, my sister-in-law, and she was the storm cloud over all of it. From the outside, people thought she was glamorous. She was the type who loved to dress up, post photos online of herself in new outfits, and talk about the parties she went to. She had an easy charm when she wanted to, the kind of smile that could make strangers think she was a doting mother. But those of us closer to her knew better. She was selfish, dismissive, and entitled to the core. Her daughter's needs were, to her, nothing more than inconveniences. If my niece needed extra attention with schoolwork, she'd wave it off with, "She's just slow. She'll figure it out." If she cried because she was scared, her mother's sharp response would be, "Stop being dramatic. You're fine." At first, I told myself maybe she was just stressed. Parenting isn't easy, after all. Maybe she was struggling with acceptance. Or maybe she hadn't adjusted to the reality of raising a child who needed more patience. But excuses only hold up for so long. The more I observed, the more I realized this wasn't stress. It was cruelty wrapped in indifference. There were early warning signs that still haunt me. One evening, I came by unexpectedly and found my niece sitting in the dark living room with no dinner, hugging her teddy bear. When I asked where her mom was, she whispered, "Out." Hours later, my sister-in-law stumbled back home, her breath sharp with alcohol, and laughed when I scolded her. "She's fine. She'll survive. Kids are tougher than you think." Another time, my niece showed me bruises on her arms, not from hitting, but from where she'd fallen trying to reach something high in the kitchen. Instead of helping her, her mom had left things deliberately out of reach, saying, "She needs to learn." Each of these moments should have been enough to make me step in sooner. But here's the painful truth. When it's family, you sometimes second-guess yourself. You think, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's not as bad as it looks. Maybe things will improve. That's the lie I told myself over and over. Still, deep down, I knew the truth. And the more time I spent with my niece, the more that truth became impossible to ignore. She was happiest when she was with me, or at school with her teachers, or even with neighbors who showed her small kindnesses. But when her mother was around, I could see the light dim in her eyes. The normal world in our family was this constant tug-of-war. Me trying to shield her, her mother dismissing or neglecting her, and my niece caught in the middle, struggling just to feel safe. And yet, despite all the cracks forming in that world, I never expected it would reach the point where a 6-year-old child would stand on a balcony rail and think of ending her life. That day, everything I'd overlooked came crashing down on me. The signs hadn't been whispers. They'd been screams I had chosen not to hear loudly enough. And after pulling her down, holding her trembling body in my arms. I promised myself, no more excuses, no more silence. From that moment on, I wasn't going to let her mother's selfishness define my niece's life. Because if I didn't act, I was certain of one thing. One day, I wouldn't be there in time to catch her. Asterisk. After that night on the balcony, I knew things had to change. Still, part of me hesitated. Change, especially in families, doesn't come without a cost. I knew that if I openly confronted my sister-in-law or involved authorities, I would be starting a war that couldn't be undone. But deep down, I also knew the war had already started, and my niece was the battlefield. The incident that finally stripped away any lingering doubt came not long after. It was a Saturday morning, bright and breezy. I had promised my niece we'd bake cupcakes together, something she loved because it made her feel grown up. I knocked on their apartment door, expecting her to run toward me with her teddy bear in tow. But there was no answer. I waited, then called out her name. The silence that followed wasn't just unsettling. It was chilling. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, the door wasn't locked. Stepping inside, I immediately noticed the place was in disarray. Clothes scattered on the couch, dishes piled high in the sink, and the faint smell of stale alcohol lingering in the air. But what made my heart drop was the sound I heard when I slid open the balcony door. Soft whimpers. Carried by the wind, there she was again, standing outside, pressed against the glass railing. But this time, it wasn't her feet on the rail. She was locked out. Her little hands were red from banging on the glass, and tears streaked down her cheeks. When she saw me, she sobbed in relief, pounding harder. Auntie, I thought you weren't coming. I rushed to her, fumbling with the latch, and when I finally pulled her inside, her small body collapsed into mine. She was shaking so badly I could feel it through my own bones. How long have you been out there? I asked, my voice trembling. Her answer was barely a whisper. Since last night. I stared at her, horrified. She explained, between gulps of air, that her mother had been angry and told her to get out of my sight. Then, without a second thought, she had shoved her onto the balcony and locked the door. Hours passed, the sun went down, the air grew cold, and still she was left there, a 6-year-old child with no blanket, no food, no one. I carried her to the couch, wrapped her in the softest blanket I could find, and just held her. My mind was spinning, but one thought screamed louder than the rest. This is no longer neglect. This is danger. When my sister-in-law finally stumbled back in hours later, makeup smudged and heels clicking clumsily against the floor, I confronted her. My voice was sharper than it had ever been before. She was locked outside all night. Do you understand she could have died? She rolled her eyes, like I had scolded her for leaving a light on. Oh, calm down. She's fine. She needs to toughen up. The casual way she said it, as if nearly freezing her daughter on a balcony was nothing, ignited a rage in me I didn't know I was capable of. I could feel my pulse in my temples, my fists clenched at my sides. I wanted to scream, but instead I forced my voice to stay steady. This is the last time. Do you hear me? You don't get another chance to put her in danger. She smirked, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and muttered under her breath, You think you're better than me just because you play babysitter. That was the moment the line was crossed. There's a difference between someone who is overwhelmed and someone who is willfully cruel. That morning, I saw clearly which one my sister-in-law was. She wasn't just failing as a mother. She was actively harming her daughter. And as I watched my niece cling to her teddy bear with wide, fearful eyes, I realized I couldn't just warn or scold anymore. Words meant nothing to a woman like her. Something had to be done, something permanent. That day, as I drove my niece back to my place for the weekend, she sat in the back seat quietly, staring out the window. Finally, she whispered, "Can I stay with you forever?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself not to cry in front of her. I reached back and squeezed her hand gently. "One day, sweetheart. One day, I promise." In my heart, I made a vow that was stronger than any promise I'd ever spoken aloud. I would not let her go back to that kind of danger. If her mother wasn't going to protect her, then I would. Whatever it took. And with that, the battle lines were drawn. Asterisk after that weekend. The promise I made to my niece weighed on me every waking moment. I knew I couldn't keep her safe forever by just bringing her over for sleepovers or picking her up when her mother needed a break. It wasn't enough. If anything, it gave her mother more excuses to shirk her responsibilities. But the more I tried to reason with her, the clearer it became. She wasn't going to change. The days that followed only proved it. I remember calling her one Monday morning to check in. My niece was supposed to be at school. Instead, I heard loud music blaring in the background, laughter, the unmistakable clinking of glasses, and over it all, my sister-in-law's impatient voice. "Don't worry about her. She's fine. She's at home, watching cartoons." I nearly dropped the phone. "At home, alone? She's 6 years old." She laughed as if I'd just told a silly joke. "Oh, stop being dramatic. I was at home by myself when I was her age. Kids are tougher than you think." That phrase again. Kids are tougher than you think. It was her excuse for everything. Every neglectful decision. Every reckless mistake. But children aren't supposed to be toughened like steel. They're supposed to be nurtured, loved. And hearing her say it so casually, I realized just how twisted her thinking had become. Things only spiraled further. One evening, I came by unannounced after work, carrying groceries because I worried my niece wasn't eating properly. When I walked in, the apartment was dim and smelled faintly of smoke. My niece was curled up on the couch with her teddy bear, wearing the same clothes she'd had on 2 days earlier. The TV flickered silently in the background, casting her little face in shadows. I asked gently, "Where's your mom, sweetheart?" She pointed toward the closed bedroom door. From inside came muffled music, laughter, and voices that didn't belong to children. My stomach turned when my sister-in-law finally emerged. Her expression was one of annoyance rather than shame. "What are you doing here?" I didn't ask for company. I held up the bag of groceries. "I brought food." "She hasn't eaten dinner." She rolled her eyes, grabbed the bag from my hands, and tossed it onto the counter like it was an inconvenience. Then she muttered, "You act like she's some fragile doll. She'll eat when she's hungry." I wanted to shout, to tell her that her daughter deserved so much more than bare survival. But I bit back the words, not because I didn't feel them, but because I knew they would fall on deaf ears. And still, it got worse. A few weeks later, the school called me, not her mother, me. Apparently, my niece had been absent for several days. And when the teacher finally reached someone at the house, it was my niece herself answering the phone. The teacher told me she sounded frightened, whispering that she didn't want to bother mommy. That was the moment my fear shifted into anger. Real, cold anger. It wasn't just negligence anymore. It was abandonment. My sister-in-law wasn't failing as a mother out of ignorance. She was failing out of choice. When I confronted her that evening, she snapped, "If you care so much, why don't you just take her? You're always acting like the saint anyway." The way she said it, flippant, dismissive, almost daring me, was a slap in the face. As if her own daughter were nothing more than a burden she could toss onto someone else. The moment it became convenient, I stared at her, my blood boiling. Do you even hear yourself? She's not baggage. She's your child. Her response chilled me. She ruined my life. Do you get that? I was supposed to be free. I was supposed to live. But instead, I got stuck with her. And now you're here, acting like I'm the villain. The venom in her voice, the utter lack of remorse, made my decision clearer than ever. The more she doubled down on her selfishness, the more determined I became to find a way out for my niece. Every cruel word she spoke, every neglectful action she took, added weight to the growing pile of evidence in my mind. I started taking notes, dates, times, things I witnessed. I kept the teacher's voicemail. I even saved text messages where she complained about having to babysit her own kid. It wasn't enough yet, but I knew it was building toward something. And then came the final straw. One night, my phone rang at nearly midnight. On the other end was my niece's tiny, trembling voice. "Auntie, I'm scared." My heart dropped. "Where are you, sweetheart? What's wrong?" "I'm at home. Mommy left. The lights are all off. I don't like the dark." I grabbed my keys without a second thought, speeding across town with my chest tight and my knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I got there, I found her curled up on the floor by the door, hugging her teddy bear like it was the only thing tethering her to safety. And her mother? She didn't stumble in until dawn, reeking of alcohol and perfume that didn't belong to her. When she saw me sitting there with her daughter, she had the audacity to scowl. "What are you doing here again?" "She's fine. You're blowing this out of proportion." Double quotes. No, that was it. The line had been crossed, and then crossed again. She wasn't just neglecting her daughter, she was daring fate to claim her. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Asterisk. There are moments in life when your body knows the truth before your mind can process it. That night, sitting on the floor, holding my terrified niece while her mother staggered in at dawn, was one of them. I felt something inside me harden, a cold clarity that burned hotter than rage. Up until then, I had been hoping, foolishly, that maybe things would improve. That if I just stepped in here and there, if I provided food, comfort, stability, then my sister-in-law might wake up to the reality of what she was doing. But that night showed me she never would. It was no longer a question of if my niece's life was in danger. It was only a question of when. The following morning, as sunlight crept through the blinds, I sat across from my sister-in-law at her kitchen table. My niece was asleep in my arms, exhausted from crying. "You can't keep doing this," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. She lit a cigarette, blew out smoke, and smirked. "You're not her mother, you know. Stop acting like you are." I tightened my hold on the little girl in my lap. "Then start acting like you are." Her smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of cold resentment. "I didn't ask for her. I didn't ask for any of this. Why should I have to sacrifice my life because of one mistake?" Her words were knives, each one driving deeper into the reality I had been trying to deny. She didn't just resent motherhood. She resented her daughter. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her until she understood the gravity of what she was saying. But instead, I felt an almost terrifying calm settle over me. "Then you've made your choice," I whispered, more to myself than to her. That was the breaking point. From that moment, I stopped seeing her as an overwhelmed woman making poor decisions. I saw her for what she truly was: a danger. A threat to the life of a child who couldn't defend herself. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The following weeks were a blur of small, searing moments that confirmed my decision. A teacher told me my niece had come to school without breakfast again, and when offered food in the cafeteria, she'd eaten as if she hadn't seen a meal in days. A neighbor confided that she'd heard yelling late at night, not just the mother's drunken rants, but the small, pleading voice of a child begging, "Please don't leave me alone." My niece began to flinch at sudden noises, her little shoulders tensing like she was bracing for impact. Every piece of evidence chipped away at the fragile wall of doubt I had been clinging to. And then came the night that burned itself into my memory forever. It was raining. Hard, relentless sheets of water beating against the windows. I was on the couch, reading, when my phone buzzed with a video call. It was my niece. Her face filled the screen, pale and streaked with tears. She was standing on the balcony of their apartment, rain pouring down on her small frame. The city lights blurred behind her. "Auntie," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I don't want to be here anymore." My heart stopped. The balcony railing looked far too high for her to have climbed safely, but far too low to stop a desperate child from making a terrible choice. I forced my voice to stay calm, even though inside I was shattering. "Sweetheart, listen to me. You don't have to be there. I'm coming. I promise. Just hold on to your teddy, okay? Stay right where you are. Don't move." I don't remember how fast I drove through the storm. I don't remember running up the stairs, pounding on the door until my knuckles bled. All I remember is bursting onto that balcony and scooping her into my arms, feeling her tiny body trembling against mine, soaked through and freezing. Her words still haunt me. "I just wanted mommy to see me. I just wanted her to care." That was it. The moment the universe screamed at me, "Enough." I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't hope things might improve. My niece's life was hanging by a thread, and I was the only one holding the scissors from cutting it. When I finally tucked her into bed at my house that night, I sat beside her until her breathing slowed into sleep. And in the quiet, I made a vow. No matter what it took, no matter what battles I had to fight, I was going to save her, not rescue her for a night, not patch her wounds until the next storm. Truly save her. Because if I didn't, one day I'd get a call I would never be able to come back from. Asterisk. When you've been pushed to your breaking point, something shifts inside you. Fear fades, hesitation burns away, and what's left is a kind of clarity that feels almost frightening in its sharpness. That's what happened to me the night I pulled my niece off that balcony. I sat at my kitchen table long after she had fallen asleep in my bed, her little teddy bear still clutched in her arms. I stared at the rain streaking down the window and whispered to myself, "I can't keep putting out fires. I have to stop the fire starter." But how? I wasn't her mother. I wasn't her legal guardian. To the outside world, I was just the aunt who helped out sometimes. And that realization nearly crushed me, because all the love in the world meant nothing if I didn't have the power to protect her when it mattered most. That's when I remembered something, a conversation from months earlier that I'd brushed aside at the time. That it was at a family gathering. My brother's friend, who happened to be a lawyer, had mentioned in passing that my niece's father, my late brother, had left behind a will. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it, but now those words echoed in my mind like a beacon. A will. If my brother had named guardianship, if he had outlined who should care for his daughter in the event of his death, that document could be my weapon. I didn't sleep a wink that night. As soon as the morning sun rose, I dug through every old box, every file folder I had ever received after his passing. My hands trembled as I finally found the envelope, yellowed slightly, but still sealed with my brother's name across the front. When I opened it, my eyes filled with tears. He had written it years ago, shortly after his daughter was born. In it, he had stated clearly, "If anything happens to me, I want my daughter to be raised by my sister. She is the only one I trust to give her a good life." My heart cracked open. It was as though he had reached out from beyond the grave and placed the answer directly into my hands. But I also knew my sister-in-law wouldn't let her go easily. She relied on the child for the government support checks. In her twisted logic, my niece wasn't a daughter, she was a source of money. If I was going to challenge her, I needed more than just the will. I needed evidence, so I began quietly documenting everything. I kept detailed records of every night I found my niece alone. Every time she arrived at school without food, every instance of neglect. I spoke with her teachers and asked them to keep notes of what they saw. They were relieved someone was finally stepping in and promised to support me if it came to court. I reached out to neighbors, asking gently if they had noticed anything. Some were hesitant at first, but a few brave souls admitted they had heard the shouting, the crying, the dangerous late-night parties. The more I gathered, the more the weight of responsibility pressed on me. It was terrifying, knowing I was preparing for a battle that could rip the family apart. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered my niece's tiny voice on that video call. "I don't want to be here anymore." That sentence alone was stronger than any fear. The final piece of the plan came to me unexpectedly. One afternoon, as I was dropping my niece off at school, she clung to my hand and whispered, "Can I stay with you forever?" I knelt down, brushed her hair back, and promised, "One day, sweetheart, you will." And that's when I realized it wasn't just about collecting evidence or waving a will in front of a judge. It was about showing clearly and undeniably that my home was her home, that I was already providing the stability, safety, and love her mother refused to give. So I made a choice. I would file for full custody. I would go to court with my brother's will in one hand and a mountain of evidence in the other. It was risky. My sister-in-law would fight. She would lie, twist, and manipulate. But I had the truth. And more importantly, I had my brother's final words, his trust in me, as my shield. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel before. Hope. That hope wasn't just for me. It was for a little girl who deserved to grow up knowing she was wanted. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just about saving her from harm. It was about fulfilling the promise my brother had unknowingly left me, to protect his daughter, no matter what it cost. The plan was set. The weapon was ready. Now it was time to use it. The morning I walked into the courthouse, my hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was adrenaline, the kind that comes when you know you're finally about to stop running and start fighting. For weeks, I had been quietly gathering everything, the will my brother left behind. School reports, teacher testimonies, statements from neighbors, and my own records, pages filled with dates, times, and descriptions of neglect. I carried it all in a heavy folder pressed against my chest like armor. This was the day I would file for custody. The clerk at the courthouse glanced up when I placed the folder on the counter. She was polite, professional, but I could tell she recognized the weight of what I was doing. Filing for custody wasn't a small step. It was a declaration of war, not against just anyone, but against my niece's own mother. Still, my voice was steady when I said, "I want to file for emergency custody of my niece." The paperwork seemed endless. Signatures, explanations, evidence lists. Each pen stroke felt like I was chiseling away at the chains holding my niece in place. When I finally slid the folder across the counter, A strange calm washed over me. I had done it. The first step was complete. Of course, my sister-in-law didn't take the news quietly. The moment she was served with papers, my phone erupted with calls and messages. Some were filled with laughter, mocking me for even trying. Others were venomous, filled with threats and promises to make me regret this. I ignored them all. I couldn't afford to engage. My job wasn't to argue with her. It was to protect my niece. But I did notice something. Beneath her rage, there was panic. She wasn't just furious that I had challenged her. She was scared, because she knew she was guilty. And for the first time, she was being forced to face it. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a blur of preparation. I met with my lawyer almost daily, rehearsing what I would say, organizing the evidence into a narrative the judge could clearly see. The will, naming me as guardian. The teacher's testimony, explaining how often my niece arrived hungry or exhausted. The neighbors' accounts of neglect and late-night absences. Photos I had quietly taken. An empty fridge, a trashed apartment. My niece asleep on my couch with dark circles under her eyes. Each piece on its own was painful. Together, they formed a picture that couldn't be ignored the night before the hearing. I couldn't sleep. I sat by my niece's bedside, watching her chest rise and fall as she slept peacefully in my home, the one place she finally felt safe. I brushed her hair gently off her forehead and whispered a promise. Tomorrow, I fight for you, and I won't stop until you're safe. She stirred slightly, clutching her teddy bear tighter. I took it as a sign, a silent affirmation that she trusted me to keep that promise. When the day came, the courtroom felt colder than I expected. The judge sat high above us, his expression unreadable. My sister-in-law entered in a rush, her hair disheveled, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She tried to mask her fear with arrogance, but I could see the cracks. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my palms flat on the table to steady myself. Your Honor, I began, my voice calm but firm. I'm here today because my niece's life is in danger. Not from strangers, not from chance, but from neglect at the hands of the one person who should love her most. I have the will of her late father, my brother, who entrusted her care to me, and I have evidence, more than enough, to prove she has not been safe in her mother's custody. Then I presented everything, piece by piece, witness by witness. Every fact I had carefully collected spilled into the room like light flooding a darkened chamber. For once, the truth wasn't just mine to carry. It was undeniable, visible for all to see. As I spoke, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about paperwork anymore. It was about giving my niece a voice when she had none. Every word I spoke was a shield I was raising around her, a promise I was keeping. And though I had no way of knowing what the judge would decide, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had done everything in my power. I had brought the fight to the very place where justice was decided now. All that was left was to see if justice would answer. Courtrooms have their own kind of silence. It's not the gentle quiet of a library or the peaceful hush of a church. It's sharp, heavy, the kind that makes every cough, every shuffle of papers, echo like a thunderclap. That silence hung in the air as the judge shuffled through the documents spread across his desk. On my left, my sister-in-law shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her earlier bravado had begun to crumble. She had shown up without proper counsel, clearly thinking she could charm or bully her way through the process the same way she handled everything else in life. But the walls were closing in, and she knew it. The judge looked up, his eyes steady. I have reviewed the evidence, he began. His voice was calm, but each word carried weight. The will left by the child's late father is valid and binding. Furthermore, the testimonies and documentation provided demonstrate a clear pattern of neglect on the part of the mother. My heart pounded. This was it. He turned toward my sister-in-law. Your behavior has placed your daughter at risk. This court cannot and will not ignore the severity of these circumstances. Effective immediately, custody is awarded to the petitioner, the child's aunt. The words rang through the courtroom like a gavel before the gavel. For a second, I didn't breathe. I felt my body go numb, as though time had frozen around me. Then, slowly, a wave of relief crashed through my chest, almost knocking the air out of me. But before I could fully process the victory, the eruption began. My sister-in-law shot to her feet, her face twisted with fury. You can't do this. She's mine. You can't take her from me. The judge's gavel slammed down once. Sit down. You will not raise your voice in this courtroom. But she wouldn't stop. She pointed at me with a shaking finger, her words spilling out like venom. You think you've won? You're nothing. You just want her for the money. The same money I'm entitled to. That was it. The mask was gone. Her words didn't just confirm everything I'd claimed. They revealed her true colors. In front of everyone. The teachers, the neighbors, the social worker in attendance, even the judge himself. They all saw it. The child wasn't a daughter to her. She was a paycheck, and in that moment, the courtroom shifted. The tension snapped, replaced by something undeniable. Justice had spoken, and there was no going back. I didn't reply to her accusations. I didn't need to. The evidence had already spoken for me, and now her own outburst sealed it. She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing, cursing under her breath. But the fight had drained out of her. The power she had held over my niece all those years was gone, stripped away by the very arrogance and neglect that had fueled it. For the first time, she looked small, powerless, and I sat there quietly, my hands folded in my lap, feeling my brother's presence beside me, as though he was whispering, "You did it. You kept your promise." When the session ended, the judge issued clear orders. My niece would live with me full-time, effective immediately. My sister-in-law was granted limited, supervised visitation, contingent on her proving she could provide a safe environment. Her face went pale at that. She knew, as well as I did, that she would never meet that standard. Walking out of that courtroom was like stepping into a new world. The sunlight outside felt brighter, sharper. I could hear the hum of the city, the chatter of strangers, the rush of traffic, but all I could think about was my niece. I couldn't wait to hold her, to tell her, "You're safe now." Truly safe, because for the first time in her short, fragile life, she was free. And her mother? She was left with nothing but the wreckage of her own making. The downfall had arrived, swift, poetic, and final. I'll never forget the look on my niece's face when I walked through the school doors that afternoon. The courtroom had ended only hours earlier, and the papers granting me custody were still warm in my bag. My hands shook as I signed her out at the front desk, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the weight of what I was about to tell her. She spotted me across the hallway, her backpack hanging off one shoulder, her little teddy bear peeking out from the zipper pocket as always. For a moment, she hesitated, as if bracing for disappointment. She had seen so many promises broken in her short life, but when I knelt down to meet her eyes, everything shifted. "Sweetheart," I said softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "you don't have to go back anymore. You're coming home with me. For good." Her eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her face. Then the word sank in. "Forever?" she whispered. I nodded, my throat tightening. Forever. You're safe now. Nobody can take you away. And just like that, the dam broke. She dropped her backpack to the floor and threw herself into my arms, clinging to me with every ounce of strength her small body had. Tears streamed down her cheeks, soaking into my sweater. But this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. I held her tight, rocking her gently as I whispered, I promised your daddy I would always protect you. And now I can. That hug, that moment, was the payoff for every sleepless night, every desperate prayer, every fight I had waged. That it wasn't about winning against her mother. It wasn't even about proving myself in court. It was about this little girl finally knowing, without a shadow of doubt, that she was wanted, that she was loved, that she belonged. When we got home that evening, she walked into my house like it was the first time she had truly seen it. She touched the walls, ran her hand across the couch where she'd fallen asleep so many times, and finally settled in her little room, the one I had quietly prepared for her in hope of this very day. Her eyes lit up at the sight, the fresh sheets, the stuffed animals lined neatly on the bed, the nightlight glowing softly in the corner. She climbed under the covers, hugged her teddy, and whispered, This is mine, isn't it? Yes, I said, kneeling by her bedside. This is your home. Later that night, as she drifted into sleep, I sat in the doorway and watched her. For the first time in years, her face was peaceful. No shadows under her eyes. No tension in her small shoulders. Just peace. That was the true victory. Not the judge's gavel. Not the custody papers. But this quiet, sacred moment of safety. And as I turned off the light, I realized something. I hadn't just saved her. She had saved me, too. She had given my life new meaning, new purpose. Together, we were starting a new chapter. One built not on fear or neglect, but on love and safety. And for the first time, the future didn't feel heavy. It felt wide open. Life didn't transform overnight. Winning custody was only the first step. There were court follow-ups, home evaluations, and paperwork that seemed to multiply no matter how much I filed away. But those burdens didn't weigh on me the same way anymore. Because now, I wasn't scrambling to prove my niece needed me. I had already secured her safety. Every form, every meeting, was just one more brick laid into the foundation of her new life. And slowly, that new life began to bloom. In the weeks that followed, I noticed the changes first in the little things. She started eating full meals without hesitation, no longer guarding her plate like someone might snatch it away. She slept through the night without calling out, without jolting awake in fear of being alone. She laughed more. Those bright, bubbling giggles of childhood that had been buried for so long beneath worry and neglect at school. Her teachers pulled me aside to say how different she seemed. She was participating in class, making friends, raising her hand with confidence instead of shrinking back. It's like she's finally a child again, one teacher told me, tears in her eyes. Hearing that was the kind of validation no courtroom could ever give me. It meant the healing had begun. As for my sister-in-law, the court had granted her supervised visitation rights, but she showed up only twice. The first time, she was defiant, trying to play the role of the wronged mother. My niece sat stiffly beside me, clutching my hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. The second time, she barely lasted 10 minutes. My niece refused to look at her, and when the visit ended, she whispered to me, I don't want to see her again. I never forced it. The judge had made it clear that visitation was a privilege, not a guarantee. Over time, her mother simply drifted away. her absence speaking louder than any confrontation ever could. She had destroyed her own bond with her daughter, and it wasn't my job to rebuild it years later. People sometimes ask me if I regret stepping into the fight, if I regret the toll it took on my life. The truth? Not for a second. Yes, it was hard. Yes, it was messy. But every time I see my niece, now thriving, confident, full of life, I know I made the only choice I could. She's not just surviving anymore. She's living. She tells me about her dreams, her favorite books, the friends she's made. She teases me about my old-fashioned taste in music. And sometimes, in quiet moments, she'll lean against me and say softly, "Thank you for saving me." But I always tell her the same thing. "No, sweetheart. Thank you for letting me." Looking back, I realized the story was never just about rescuing her from danger. It was about justice, not in the grand, sweeping sense of laws and verdicts, but in the intimate sense of giving a child the life she deserved. And justice, in this case, was poetic. Her mother lost custody not because I outsmarted her, but because her own neglect and selfishness betrayed her. She created the very evidence that doomed her. That's what made the victory so satisfying. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was justice, plain and undeniable. Today, our home is filled with laughter, with routines, with the kind of ordinary chaos that every child deserves. School projects spread across the dining table, laundry baskets that never seem to empty. Weekend movie nights with popcorn and too many blankets. It's not perfect. No home ever is. But it's safe. It's loving. And it's ours. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that sometimes justice doesn't come in a dramatic moment of revenge. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, steady rebuilding of a life. That's what we did. That's what we're still doing. And every time I see my niece smile without fear, I know we won.